Okay, let's get started. Shalom Aleichem Yehuda. Okay, so tonight I'm going to dedicate our Divrei Torah tonight, of course, in honor of our Rebbetzin, whose yahrzeit is tonight, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, and we're going to learn a second class about the laws of selecting on Shabbos. Before we get into the deeper elements tonight, just to recap briefly what we learned last week. In order to be able to select something on Shabbos and not transgress the prohibition of beirer, of selecting on Shabbos, there are three conditions. Condition number one is that you're taking the good out of the bad, not the bad out of the good. Number two, you're doing this with your hand and not with a special tool. And number three, you're doing this for the purpose of eating immediately and not because of something that's going to happen later on that day. If any of these conditions aren't present, then it's not considered that you're just eating, it's considered that you're selecting. For example, if you're using a special tool, that's not the way people eat with a special tool. That's called selecting. Although your purpose may be to eat later on, the next day, the next evening, but right now you are doing something which is not relevant to your eating, and therefore it's considered the prohibition of selecting. Okay. So the Gemara Yerushalmi discusses in Gemara Yerushalmi in Shabbos Perek Zayin Lacha Beis, says the shochach tuma kad mivchat lipaisa chay mishum beirer. The Gemara says if you open up garlic on Shabbos and you take off the peel of the garlic on Shabbos, you are chayiv mishum beirer. It's a biblical prohibition of selecting on Shabbos. You're taking out the peel from the garlic. You are liable, that is transgressing the biblical prohibition of beirer. It sounds like whenever you peel something, you're going to be liable to the prohibition of beirer. And the same thing would seem to apply whenever you peel an apple, whenever you peel a cucumber, whenever you peel an orange, you're going to be liable, according to Gemara Yerushalmi, for beirer. You're taking out the bad from the good. You're taking out the peel from the garlic. You're taking out the peel of the apple from the apple. It's not, the peel is edible, but since you don't want the peel right now, you want to eat the fruit of the apple, not the peel, you're taking the peel off. So you're liable for beirer. It's a prohibition of beirer. And the Magen Avram actually comments on this. The Magen Avram says that indeed, evim kain af tapuchim asur klif. If apples should be prohibited by the same token, according to this logic. So the Sefer HaTruma interprets the Gemara Yerushalmi, and Sefer HaTruma says that the Gemara Yerushalmi doesn't mean literally whenever you peel a garlic, you're going to be liable from beirer. It's only when you're peeling the garlic for the purpose of eating later on. But if you're going to eat the garlic immediately, that's the way you eat. In the language of Sefer HaTruma, if you want to eat, you're allowed to eat, you got to peel the garlic or peel the apple to eat it right away. That's the Sefer HaTruma says. So although the Gemara Yerushalmi says that you're chayiv, he qualifies it. What are you chayiv? If, as we learned last time, if you have an example we gave last class about the apples, if you do something, you separate the good apples from the bad apples, but you're doing this to eat the good apples later on, take the apples out of the bag, the good apples out of the bag, and you're not planning to eat right away, that's beirer. If you're not going to eat them right away, so too, if you peel the garlic, you're not going to eat the garlic right away, that's beirer. But if you're going to eat the garlic right now, that's not beirer. That's the Sefer HaTruma says, and that's how the Ramah paskins. The Ramah gives this ruling in Siman Shin Chafal of Sif Yud, says the Ramah, you're not allowed to peel garlic or onions if you're peeling them to leave them for later on. But you're allowed to peel the garlic or peel the onion to eat it right away. That's the Ramah Paskins. And that's how the Alter Rebbe paskins as well. Now, we don't actually have the entire Siman Shin Chafal of the Alter Rebbe. Some of it is missing. But we can learn what the Alter Rebbe's opinion is about this halacha from the Alter Rebbe's rulings in Siman Shin Yutes. We were going over the halachas of dash, halachas of threshing. We learned that the Alter Rebbe says that in Shulchan Aruch that if the legumes are in their husks on Erev Shabbos, but you've detached the beans, let's say, from their husks on Erev Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe says that on Shabbos there's no prohibition of dash, no prohibition of threshing because you've removed it already, but it's still inside the pod. It's still inside that pod or that husk. And now you want to take the peas or the beans out of that pot on Shabbos. So Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to. There's no prohibition of dash, but there is a prohibition of beirer. You are taking the good out of the bad. And therefore, says the Alter Rebbe in Siman Shin Yutes if Tes, you're allowed to peel the sharvitin, the pods that already have been opened from before Shabbos. Rakshi Yizar, but be careful, but only take out what you want to eat right now. But don't take out now what you want to eat later on because of the prohibition of beirer. So you are selecting, even though you are taking the good out of the bad, but it's still selecting, and therefore it's only permissible right before you eat. So that's how they say it. That's how the Ramah rules. That's how the Sefer HaTruma rules. That's the Gemara Yerushalmi rules. The Magen Avraham rules, and the Alter Rebbe rules. That in a scenario of an egg, where you have to peel the egg, or peel the onion, or peel the garlic, and do this with your hands, it's permissible if going to eat it right away. But there is another opinion, and that's the opinion of the Amshal Shlema and the Rosh, who say that if you're peeling an orange, we don't look at this as separating the good from the bad. We look at this instead as one solid fruit. You're merely like, it's analogous to cutting the fruit in half. So it's not considered beirer at all. It's not considered separating the good from the bad or the bad from the good at all. And therefore would come under the usual parameters of the laws of selecting that are only permissible on certain conditions. You're only allowed to do it without a utensil. You're only allowed to do this if you're going to eat right away. The Rosh says we're talking about one fruit, and so the peel and the fruit are one entity. And the Rosh says that while the peel, once it's separated from the orange, or once the shells of the walnut are separated from the walnut, now you have a pile of walnuts with their shells, and they're all mixed together. While the Rosh would agree that scenario would indeed be a fall into the category of a mixture that would involve the prohibition of selecting, but when you have the walnut that's opened, and you have the orange that's in its peel, walnut, in that scenario, it's not a question of selecting. It's merely a question of cutting the same fruit in half, so to speak, because the shell or the peel is of one entity with the fruit. And therefore, it would be permissible to do this at any time. You wouldn't have to do this necessarily in the morning. In the evening, when you want to eat in the evening, you could do this in the morning, in the evening as well, because it does not fall in the category of beirer. This is the language of the Rosh in the Beitza, Perek Aleph Siman Chav Gimel. Says the Rosh, Nirali the begoizim ubatim shenishtabu nochanayim b'kipasim, where there are nuts that have been broken open and they're still lying in their shells. Although there is more shell than fruit, however, we do not consider the shell to be in the category of waste, of garbage, and therefore there's a scenario of selecting the fruit from the garbage, which is a prohibition on Shabbos. We don't look at it like that. Why? That's their nature of these fruits. This is considered instead a guarding, a protection for the fruit. It's unlike bones or shells that have been separated from the food. Once it's been separated, indeed, then it's considered like waste, and not considered part of the food. But before it's separated, says the Rosh, I don't consider this as an issue of separation. Therefore, it wouldn't fall in the category of bורר, and therefore you could separate in the morning and eat in the evening. And that's also Yam Shel Shleimah rules in Beitza. It's considered like one type, not considered like a mixture of two different types. It's not considered garbage, but it's considered part of the fruit. In any way that you're going to remove the food from the shell, it's considered preparing the food. It's not considered an act of separation at all. And therefore, another halachic difference would be that you would be allowed to use a peeler. According to the Rosh Yam Shel Shleimah, we said before that on Shabbos, you cannot separate the good from the bad, even to eat right away, if you're using a special utensil. So the example of that nowadays would be a peeler. A peeler is made specifically to separate the bad from the good. So even though you could peel the orange with your hands, can you use a special utensil to peel an apple? So according to the Yam Shel Shleimah and the Rosh, you could. Why? Because it's not considered an act of separating the bad from the good. It's considered the way you eat. You're eating one item, one food. According to what we learned till now of the Magen Avram and the Alter Rebbe and the Sefer HaTruma and the Yerushalmi, there would be an issue. So it seems like the halacha follows the Sefer HaTruma, and it seems like the Rosh disagrees with the Gemara Yerushalmi and has a different ruling, and our halacha follows the more stringent opinion, and therefore you cannot peel an apple with a peeler on Shabbos, and you can only peel an apple with a knife. A knife does peel an apple, it's not your hand, but it's not in the category of kli hamiyuch lakach. It's not in the category of a specialized utensil that's used for peeling. Instead, it's like your hands. And so to peel an apple on Shabbos, it would seem the only way to do this would be with your hands, not with a special utensil. And the Rosh and the Yam Shel Shleimah is a different dissenting opinion, but it's not the halacha. That's what it would seem like. However, if you look in the Ramah, in the laws of Yontif, the laws of Yontif are a lot less stringent when it comes to the laws of selecting. There are prohibitions of selecting in Yontif. We're not going to discuss them tonight, but overall on Yontif, it's a lot more lenient, and a lot of things which are biblically prohibited on Shabbos to select, to separate the good from the bad, are allowed on Yontif in a scenario where you couldn't do it before Yontif. And even if you're not going to eat it right away, we're not going to eat it right now, but on Yontif, it's a lot more lenient. So the Ramah says a rule about the nuts that are in, that the shell is still covering the nut. The Ramah mentions parenthetically in the laws of Yontif in Siman Tov Kuf Yud Sif Aleph, he says that almonds that were broken and they're still in their shell, that's not considered the klippa. The shell is not considered pseil, it's not considered waste, not considered garbage, because it's still mixed together with it, and therefore it's not considered waste at all. It sounds like, from the language of the Ramah, that he agrees with the Rosh. It sounds like that he and the Rosh are saying the same thing. I don't consider the klippa, I don't consider the shell to be waste, which seems to contradict what the Ramah says in Siman Shin Chaf Aleph. So the Magen Avram asks this question, and the El Yerabba addresses this question, and the El Yerabba says, and Siman Tov Kuf Yud Sif Katan Daled v'nirli lekashem midi. I don't think this is a question at all. Why? The Shammai Sheis Laniach. Although the Ramah doesn't qualify what you're doing with those nuts, he says the Gemara doesn't say that you're going to eat them immediately. However, the Yerabba says that when the Ramah says that there's no issue at all of Beirer, of separating, selecting on Shabbos, the Ramah is referring to a scenario where you're going to eat it right away. When you eat it right away, then there's no issue. So although it's not explicit in the Ramah, that's the Ramah saying. The Yerabba says we're forced to interpret the Ramah's words like this. Otherwise, we have a contradiction of Ramah and Ramah. The Ramah says one thing in Taf Kuf Yud that says that the shells are considered part of the fruit, and he says something else in Siman Chaf Aleph. So that's how he reconciles the two Ramahs. He says when do we could say it's considered a garbage, and that there's an issue of Beirer. That's if you're going to eat it. If you're going to eat it later on. However, if you're going to eat it immediately, then there is no issue of Beirer. That's how you're forced to explain the Ramah. That's what the El Yerabba says. The Alter Rebbe, we discussed what the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, but in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe seems to say the same thing as the Rosh and as the Ramah says in Siman Taf Kuf Yud. The Alter Rebbe discusses the laws of eating nuts on Shabbos. He says it's better not to eat nuts on Shabbos unless you took them out of their shell on Friday. Unless you can remove them from their shell on Friday, don't eat the nuts on Shabbos. Why not? Now, the language of the Alter Rebbe. Even though while the fruit is in its shell, the whole fruit or part of the fruit is in its shell, you're allowed to take off the shell with your hand, and it's not considered beirer. However, after the shell has been removed, if there is a piece of a shell on one of the fruits and one of the nuts, you take the shell off, you will be liable in the prohibition of beirer. It sounds like that the Alter Rebbe is saying exactly like the Rosh. While the nut is in its shell, it's not considered a beirer. And it seems like according to the Alter Rebbe, the logic would follow that you're allowed to use a peeler then to peel an apple or to peel a cucumber on Shabbos. That's what it would seem like. However, the Tzemach Tzedek asks this question. Seemingly, the Alter Rebbe, just like we find this contradiction in the Ramah, the Alter Rebbe also seems to contradict himself. And although you might want to answer that the Alter Rebbe is in the Siddur, and many things in the Siddur are, the Alter Rebbe addresses halachas that he said in Shulchan Aruch, and he comes to a different conclusion in the Siddur than he did in the Shulchan Aruch. And you might want to say the same as over here, but it's very difficult to say that because the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, you see from the whole language of all the halachas in the Siddur, that when the Alter Rebbe is reviewing the halachas of Shabbos again, and saying it's very short, Hilchos Shabbata is very short. It's one page. All of these things that the Alter Rebbe mentions are things we have to be careful about. The Alter Rebbe is not saying ignore the Sefer Truma, ignore the Gemara Yerushalmi, ignore the Magen Avraham, ignore the Ramah. On the contrary, in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe is bringing many chumras, many stringencies. So it's very unlikely to say that the Alter Rebbe is coming to be lenient and now just to ignore, say, and now we should side with the Gemara Yerushalmi and I'm sorry, side instead with the Rosh and say that there's no issue at all of peeling. It's very difficult to say that's what the Alter Rebbe means. So Tzemach Tzedek asks this question. He asks, what is the meaning of the Alter Rebbe's words over here? It seems like he's siding with the Rosh. And apparently Tzemach Tzedek wrote a letter to Mechamed de Brovne to discuss this issue. And he asks, the Tzemach Tzedek says, it sounds like the Alter Rebbe is siding with the Rashal and the Rosh, but the Taz and the Magen Avraham disagree. So what is the Alter Rebbe doing over here in the Siddur? So Rabbi Chaim de Brovne answered the Tzemach Tzedek, and he told Tzemach Tzedek, this question was asked about the Ramah too. And the El Yerabba gave his answer. So it seems that the answer that we gave for the Ramah should also be the same answer given to the Alter Rebbe. That when you're going to eat it right away, then there's no issue of beirer. If you're going to eat it later, there is an issue of beirer. Medivei Merchami Zikni Rabbeinu Besider Din Beis Mashma L'Sfirele L'Chayil L'Shach Beirer Klal V'Hu Kanama. It sounds like the Alter Rebbe paskins like the Ramah in Siman Taf Kuf Yud I like the Rashal, and like the Rosh says the Nechema Ayin Sham El Yerabba Mitaz Kushas Magad Avram Mesev Shishim Shchavalaf Anal. Look in El Yerabba. The El Yerabba asks the same question as the Magad Avram, and he answers that the Ramah is not a contradiction because the Ramah is not contradicting himself because the Ramah is referring to a scenario where you're going to eat the fruit right away. That's what the David Nechema answered Tzemach Tzedek, and the Reb Chaim Noah, who was more of a contemporary Torah scholar in the last 100 years, he says, I don't understand the question. If you look carefully at the language of the Alter Rebbe, it sounds very clear from the language of the Alter Rebbe that he's talking about eating it right away. He says, if you look carefully in the language of the Alter Rebbe, he says, you're allowed to remove it biyodeh, with your hand. Why is he emphasizing with your hand? If he actually sided with the Rosh and the Yam Shel Shleimei, you will be allowed to use it. You would be allowed to use a special utensil. You will be allowed to take the good from the bad or the bad from the good because it's not considered better. So the fact that he says you're allowed to remove the shell with your hand and we don't consider this better sounds like that very clear from the Alter Rebbe that he is saying the same thing that he said in Shulchan Aruch, that the only reason why this is not considered better is just because you're eating it right away. But in general, just because the fruit is in its peel, in its shell, the eggs are in their shell, we do not consider it as one entity, like the Rosh and the Yam Shel Shleimei want to say. Instead, we consider it as oichel and pselos, as food and waste, and therefore all of the rules of better apply. And if you only allowed to peel the eggs, or peel the garlic, or peel the onion, or peel an apple, when you want to eat it right away, and without a peeler, you can't use a peeler. That's what the Chaim Nar says, and there is another line of the Tzemach Tzedek which addresses a question which isn't so common today, but it does have common applications today as well. Tzemach Tzedek says, if you want to eat herring, and instead of the herring having all the bones removed, you have the herring. The herring it has small bones inside the herring. What should you do? Do you have to put the herring in your mouth and take the bones out of your mouth? What do you do? So the Tzemach Tzedek says, when you're eating fish and there's small bones in the fish, are you allowed to remove the bones? Says the Tzemach Tzedek, according to the Rashal, it seems that it's okay. And it seems that we should be lenient because there are other reasons to be lenient, although we don't pass like the Marshal, but we still can use the Marshal as a sniff. Sniff means that as one of the factors in giving the final halachic ruling. Since the Marshal is lenient and the Rashba is lenient, so therefore we could allow to remove the bones of the fish before eating the fish. You'll have to take the bones out of the fish before eating the fish. It's not considered beirer because you're doing this to eat right away. It's okay. However, there are those who say that they're not so comfortable with interpreting Tzemach Tzedek this way, and they say that you shouldn't remove the bones of the fish unless you're eating the fish right now. While you're eating the fish right now, take the bones out of the fish. That's fine. But you shouldn't remove the bones like a few minutes before eating the fish, like while you're preparing the meal. You're about to eat. We said last class that if it's not an hour away, if people coming home from shul already, you're allowed to separate the pselos and oichel, to separate the garbage from the food and prepare the food. And so it seems like from Tzemach Tzedek could do the same thing. But some people say that you should be more strict and you shouldn't remove regarding the herring specifically. It's not exactly the same scenario of separating the peel from the peel from the orange. And they want to say you should be more strict and say instead you should only remove the bones right before you eat the fish. There is another scenario that is affected by this halacha when you eat chicken. So you can't really remove the bone. Let's say you're not comfortable removing the bone from the chicken. You're not comfortable eating the chicken with the bone inside. You want to take the bone out. So that seems to be a clear scenario of taking the soilus out of the oichel, taking the bad out of the good. It seems like it would be forbidden, even though you're eating right away and you're doing it with your hand. But you're able to eat the chicken without removing the bone. You can't say this is the only way to eat it, like by an apple or an orange. So would you be allowed to take the bone out? So there are those that say that there's a way to do it. If you take, some people like to eating the inside of the bone, but even if you don't like eating the inside of the bone, if you take the bone for a second, you put it in your mouth and to taste the gravy or whatever on the bone, that would allow you to take the bone out of the chicken, then to eat the chicken by itself, if you don't like eating the chicken while it's on the bone. And the same was also with the bones of the fish. You could do the same thing. You could take the bones out of the fish and you could taste them and throw them away. But according to Machzedek, it seems that if you go while you're about to eat it, you don't have to put the fish in your mouth and then take the bones out. You're allowed to take the fish out of the bones out of the fish right before you eat it, and that's fine. Okay, that's what I wanted to share tonight. Any questions? I know I promised you the tea bag last time, Yuda. We'll get tea bag next time, Mr. Shem.
It's okay. One question.
Yeah.
If you have watermelon and you have the seed, what are you doing?
I was going to discuss that tonight, and I didn't come to a conclusion. I think I would think that it will be okay, but I know that people are very strict about the watermelon, and I don't know why. I'll look into it, Mr. Shem. I'll get back to you. But according to what we're saying tonight, it seems that will be fine. It seems like you're about to eat the watermelon. It would seem the same thing as the bones of the fish. I don't see why it would be different. Why can't you take the pits out of the watermelon before you eat it? Some people are very strict. And they only spit the pits out of their mouth once they put the watermelon in their mouth. But I have to look into it. Thank you for bringing it up. I mamash was going to go there, but I didn't come to a conclusion about it. Okay. Next class we'll address that with the tea bag, hopefully.
I send you text.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, I got your text. Thank you very much, Yuda. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.